Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. While it may not seem clear to those listening, since episodes of The New Masculine have continued on their regular release schedule, I recently gave myself a little break to reset and recharge. Life was very, lifey towards the end of 2023, and I craved some space for myself. Man, was that a good idea. But I'm back, feeling replenished and excited for all the powerful conversations this podcast allows me to have. And I can't think of a better guest to help me step back in than Charles Suwa Singh. Charles is an executive and life coach with many talents that support a vast variety of clients, but has a specific passion for working with men of color. That passion led him to create For Men of Color, a peer coaching program for men of Black, brown, mixed race, or of African, Caribbean, or Asian ancestry. In the community he's created, he recognizes the importance of being in spaces where others look like you and have shared lived experiences. And he seeks to remove the internal debate many men feel about what is safe and not safe to talk about with others. To the men he works with, he states, "You do not have to hide your race, gender, faith, gifts, family history, trauma, or aspirations. In fact, all of you is accepted with love, compassion, and curiosity." When asked, Charles identified himself as a man of color, as a coach, as a facilitator, and as a mentor. I'm thrilled to have him, his insights, and the work he's created shared with the New Masculine community. So let's welcome him in and learn from his life stories. Thanks for joining me, Charles.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction. That was pretty cool.
Oh, I'm glad you like that. I challenge myself, even with guests that I'm sort of new to meeting, to write something and sort of reflect back and see how it lands with them.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that kind of is sort of affirmative when I hear it back at me.
Oh,
So
it's good.
I'm on track.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Is there anything I didn't mention that feels important for people to know as we kind of start our conversation?
No, I think that was pretty robust and full. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So let's start where I like to start with everybody, by talking about your own personal journey. We know that there's like this sort of professional side of you that's leading men's work that I definitely want to get into, but I also think it's important to learn about you just as an individual man.
Yeah.
Tell me what stories come to mind when you think about growing up in our culture, our shared culture, our different cultures, the way that you've lived your life.
Right. Absolutely. Well, the obvious thing is I guess I'm a man of color. I'm a first generation Canadian. My family originated in Guyana, and we are of mixed race. We consist of African, Chinese, Indian, European, just to round them off a little bit. And living in the part of Canada I'm from, which is East Toronto, which was largely, lower middle class white. It had me sort of compare the values I was learning at home with the values I was experiencing, like in my neighborhood and my school. Right? It was not until growing up and like going into high school, where the school I was going to was much more racially diverse, which had me experience my identity in different ways. I grew up also with the benefit of having a multi-generational home. So not only did I live with my parents, I also lived with my grandparents. So I had two fathers and two mothers in the same home,
Oh, I
right?
bet there
Which
were
is
some challenges and some delights about that.
well, it was fantastic in the way that I got to see how different men showed up in my
Mm,
world, namely my grandfather and my father, and also interacting with women because again I had my grandmother living with me, which had a different perspective of life, and my mother too, right? And roles and responsibilities and all that, and taking care of myself and my sister. And then growing up, it's like, you do what everybody expects you to do: finish school, get into a career, earn enough money to afford a life of your own, and all those things. Um, but then there was other messages I got between living at home and out in the world that I was always reconciling. Like, I have to work harder than the other, the individual beside me because of where I'm from and who I am and how I appear in the world and stuff like that. So I grew up with a lot of mixed messages particularly when it became about being a man, being a man of color, being a professional man, a career-oriented man, all those things. I was always reconciling what these messages were. And then I got into a group in my mid 30s, early mid 30s, and that's where I began actually working on, you know, my manhood, my masculine energy. And when I had joined a group of men at that time, and it was about 11, 12 men, and we met consistently over a course of about 7, 8 years. So that was my first, leap into doing men's work. I always was curious about who I was spiritually, culturally, racially, even how I related with women and whatnot too. But to really get deep into having conversations with other men, that showed up when I was in my 30s.
mm. Yeah, so I hear you talking about, and I think I can make some assumptions about what they are, but I'd actually really like to know instead of assuming, actually hear from you. Like,
Yes.
you talk about this tension of these sort of like mixed messages you were receiving at home versus out in the world or in school. And so, can you identify some of what those primary kind of mixed messages you were wrestling with growing up?
Well, I think one of the primary things that I had to understand and even unlearn for a great part of my adult life was the idea that because I'm an immigrant and because I'm a man of color, I had to work harder than anybody else,
Mm,
and I could not assume, what was in front of me. Uh, I couldn't take those things for granted. I couldn't take opportunities for granted. I couldn't take jobs for granted. I couldn't take my rank or position in an organization for granted, because you never know, right? Versus where I see my white body counterparts, there's kind of like this known thing. They're gonna figure it out. It's all good, right?
mm,
Um, there's this notion, as a person of color, that you have to work harder than the next guy,
mm-hmm,
and expect to get half the distance,
mm.
right? So even though I applied myself and worked very hard, yeah, I did not scale the ladder, the corporate ladder, like other people in the organizations I worked with. And many a times, yeah, I had to assume it was my identity that got in my way,
Was that
right?
was that something that mainly came externally from the culture you were living in, or was that something you were taught internally in the family also? Like that was like instilled into you?
Well, it was a bit of both. Like, for example, my father was a well-educated man, had his degrees in sciences. He was a professor back home where he was born and raised. But coming to Canada, well, first coming to Canada was out of a need because of there's a political issues back home. But coming to Canada, there was a rude awakening that his profession, his professionalism, his education, his training, his years of expertise meant nothing
Oh, wow.
here. So you had to really start from scratch. So around the time I was born, my father was, working in factories, sweeping floors, and he had to figure out, okay, what's his next move, right?
Mm.
And so he had to get re-educated, and because his degree didn't mean anything here, right? So he had to get re-educated while, pretty much working the factory floor and start from ground zero.
It'd be fascinating to have have a conversation with your dad around this whole concept that you and I are talking about, like our masculinity. Like, I wonder what that did to him. I wonder how that impacted him to have trained to have like a level of professionalism in one area, but then have it mean nothing in another, and have it to sort of reinvent yourself.
Yeah, well, it doesn't come, it's not, because what he did it back home being Guyana, that was his passion. That was his love,
Yeah.
right? That was ingrained in him to teach, to educate, and the sciences. That was his love, right? But to be told that you can't practice that and now here, right? Like, yeah, you can imagine yourself being gutted, right? Like your
Yeah.
confidence is gone, your sense of purpose is gone, and all those things. But it also, he had to make the best of a really bad situation. And my father, what I learned from him is a sense of resilience
Mm.
and a sense of courage and a sense of focus and determination out of a bad situation. And those were the lessons I got from him about that commitment to family, not taking anything for granted, and having to put the time in and the work, right? And, it paid off. My dad, became a very successful accountant and was operating a firm of his that he created for about 30 plus years before he passed away. But that's those were the things that he had taught me, is like, don't take anything for granted. You've got to put the time in, you've got to put your effort. And it's always best to do your own thing versus relying on somebody else. You know what I mean? He really got into that. He really ingrained in me that sense of entrepreneurship and doing it your own way.
Yeah, you
Right?
and I get that as entrepreneurs in this world.
Exactly.
nah, I'm not, this has kind of ruined me. I'm not sure I could go follow someone else's rules again.
No. And I did have a couple of lessons learned through my career that it's
Sure.
much better to do your own thing, carve your own path,
Mm.
than to follow somebody else's.
Well, I'm so glad that you shared some of the lessons you gained from your father, the way what he modeled. It may not have always been necessarily direct teaching, but just his actions, his way of showing up, his way of
Yeah,
showing up for his family, because so often we as men are faced with hardship in the world, and that can either help us be more resilient and expand our capacity and dig into our value system to really continue to be the man we can be proud of and that
yeah,
our children can be proud of. Or we
yeah.
have the opportunity to go in the other direction and let those hurts and challenges of the world kind of degrade us to the point where we are no longer able to show up in a way that models those powerful lessons
Absolutely.
that you learned from your dad.
Absolutely. No, 100% agreed. And that there, again, like going back to being a man of color, that's very apparent. Like many people come to, Canada or the US wanting a better life for their kids.
Mm-hmm.
Some make it, many don't, right? And might be the predicament or circumstances, situations they found them in. Maybe they didn't come in with the right energy or their support systems and everything like this. It was fortunate enough for my family, my mom and my father, when they came to Canada, they had a support system here. We
Oh,
had
okay.
extended family. We had a large Guyanese community here that understood, appreciated, had compassion for the situation we were in. And, so they built that social network here that was essential for them to feel grounded, that they had a community, that they had some sense of belonging.
Hmm.
So that there was sorted out. And, having my grandparents come and live with us too was also a blessing as well, too, right? Which took a lot of pressure off.
I bet those we'll talk about it as we continue on in the conversation, but I bet those lessons and like the success that was created in your family through community, through a sense of belonging, even in a new area, that has fueled some of why you've created a community for people so that they can feel seen and live in shared experiences and feel supported.
100%,
Yeah.
like you probably know this, through your own work, how isolated we're
Yeah.
experiencing life right now, how lonely people are feeling, particularly with men of all ages, feeling their social networks are really small, they're superficial, mostly maybe virtual. They're not supportive in the right way. So I think now, of any time, I think it's very important for us to build community of men. And because yeah, it's a lonely world out there if you're going to try to strive to do it by yourself, man.
Yeah.
And there's as much as we believe in individualism and my personal right to whatever I want, you can't do it by yourself,
You can't. And yet our
right?
culture has overvalued, or much of Western culture has valued that individualism, and that sort of pick yourself up by your bootstraps is what we hear in the United States all the time. It's like your personal responsibility to whether you succeed or fail in this world. And so much of what the last several years have been about uncovering is that it's not as simple and easy as that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's where I'm running across the culture,
Uh-huh.
right? Of individualism is trying to encourage men to be in community with other men, right?
Beautiful.
You know, um, there's that sentiment by Bell Hooks that, and I'm going to butcher it because I'm not really good at remembering quotes, but the sense that we can't heal on our own. We need community to heal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to grow and to prosper. I don't like the idea of just a social animal. We live in communities.
Yeah.
We build communities.
Mm-hmm.
That's the DNA of being human, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've lost sight of that in this kind of pursuit of personal enlightenment or evolution or individualism, whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to call it. I think we lost sight of that. And we do need to go back to, our core need to be together, to be in community with other men.
I so agree with you. And I think that's why I do a version of coaching that involves horses, and I take people out to do experiential and relational learning with horses. And I think that's why I'm drawn to that work, is because horses also understand community and
Yeah.
belonging and need each
Yeah.
other in order to stay safe in this world and
Right.
to thrive in this world. They are highly emotional creatures that have these very strong communal bonds with each other. They just do it differently than we do it as humans. And so
Yeah.
they offer us a model for what individualness, like being an individual within a collective, can be about, and how power can be held and shared,
Yeah.
and how resources can be held and shared. And
Yeah.
I just think that, like, I always tap back into that when I bump into the culture that you and I are kind of
Yeah.
rubbing up against, which is telling us
Yeah.
that we need to be individual and self-sufficient and out
Yeah.
there alone on our
Yeah.
as men.
But I love how you bring in the other world into this conversation because you see it across all different species,
Mm-hmm.
right? The moment I was watching a documentary on chimpanzees the other day, and once a chimpanzee feels that they don't belong, depression kicks in, anxiety kicks in, right? Self-defeating behaviors start to kick in, right? Desperation starts to kick in. Like you can see physically and emotionally, the nature of the chimpanzee changes
Mm.
and they're isolated. I see it in our culture, the same
Mm-hmm.
thing occurring,
100%.
right? The use of drugs and alcohol and pornography and all these to sort of, numb out those feelings of anxiety and depression and isolation and loneliness. Like it's all over the place now,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not bettering our mind, mental health or physical health or spiritual health by isolating ourselves or seeking the individual. We
Mm-hmm.
need to be in community.
We definitely undervalue the important, like, human nutrient that it is to be connected and to belong
Yeah,
and to be seen and to be valued and to feel worthy of
right.
being in relationship.
And feel on purpose that you're contributing to something bigger than yourself too. It's not just like, oh, I get all this out of it.
Uh-huh.
Is that I have a place to contribute to,
Mm.
right? I have a place to feel that I'm on purpose, or I'm creating meaning, or I'm creating opportunities for other people, right? And all those things attached as well, right? So it's that relational piece, that's kind of cyclical relational piece. I get something, I give back, and it's that kind of energy is. I think we really need more of that.
For sure. I want to take a step back and actually ask you a little bit about, you really clearly laid out some of the lessons you learned from your dad. you also had another male figure in your life being your grandfather, and I'd love to hear
Yeah.
what are the things you learned from him, because you did sort of call out that they held themselves differently, or there were
Oh
probably
yeah.
some differences that you were able to observe.
There was, yeah, my grandfather, man, I could not, I did not witness a man who was more patient than
Oh,
him.
wow.
Um, he never raised his voice. He always saw all sides. He always he always strived to understand versus voicing an opinion. He was always quiet and patient with you, with your questions, with your curiosities and such. He was incredibly smart. Like he knew something about everything. He's always taking in information. He is always taking in stories. He was an avid reader, loves the news and whatnot. And he would just inform me about what was going on in the world. Um, Very faith oriented. He taught me the value of faith, of trusting, of you know of God. Even his relationship with God was right there. Like you felt it, right? And I kind of, some of those things I've forgotten over the years. And then, you get to a point where it's like, no, okay, I got to bring some of those things, those stories back too, right? So even where I'm at right now, I'm, reimagining my relationship with God and reimagining my relationship with the divine and the authentic self and all those things. And much of that was inspired by my grandfather.
Mm, I love
Yeah.
that. It's so interesting because I don't think I've heard an example of a guy share that they had a role model of a man in their life that was patient and sought to understand rather than share an opinion. That was such a powerful way of approaching that. Because when I listen to like the women in my life, or when I listen to the people of color in my life, there a lot of what's in our culture as the conversation around sort of like white male privilege is how often men are sharing their opinion rather than listening, or rather than
Yeah.
seeking to understand someone else's lived experience, they're just sharing their
Yeah.
opinion. And that's
Yeah.
such a powerful, you had somebody that you respected and that you saw as a true man in your life, and he had the skill set of seeking to understand rather than trying to first start with his opinion.
Yeah. No. And that's where, I got the best of both worlds, right?
Mm-hmm.
My father was, he wanted to figure stuff out and fix it and give his point of view and perspectives and all that.
Uh-huh.
And my grandfather was the other energy, right? Like, so I got to see, okay, you could be both of these things. It's kind of cool.
Amazing.
So
Amazing to see the spectrum that you can see like
yeah,
the very clear and assertive side of the masculine in terms of perspective and opinion and that kind of stuff, but also
yeah,
the more like I think what we would probably call, but not everybody feels comfortable with this, but like the more feminine bodied, emotional bodied man that seeks to understand and seeks to understand consensus and other perspectives, not just their own.
yeah, absolutely. And I got to see, living with them, two perspectives of what it was to be a man, a father, a husband, a provider, a caretaker, what it was to be responsible for family,
Mm,
because both of them held that to a high level, but expressed it quite differently,
mm.
right? And so I got to see these two, and these are, this is the interesting thing for me was that this is my mother's father that I'm living with, not my dad's father.
Oh, okay.
So
So
completely
got
two
it.
different upbringings and everything, right? Um, so even you saw sometimes the tensions between the two of them showed up because yeah, they weren't born and raised in the same kind of family system,
Hmm.
right? So how they dealt with their own differences also, right, was in our home as well too.
And what was that model like, the way they navigated their differences?
Well, not always with grace or style, but they would always get to an understanding of some kind, right? And I do believe they truly respected each other. And and they appreciated everything that they were trying to do. they appreciated what the other one was trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And being respectful in that. And one of the things that the three of us love to do is connect over sports.
Mm-hmm.
So I could remember days in my childhood watching, whether it's boxing or baseball or whatever on TV, tennis, what like that was the thing us men did. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that felt that was our thing. Right. And we can spend an afternoon together and just chirp over televised sports. And that was our thing, man. That was
Yeah.
always our thing. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that thing with us, because
You're welcome.
I love knowing more about the way that men interact, because I think we don't get to see very many models as men about that. There are sort of like sports, drinking at a bar. There's a few different places that we know what like male intimacy looks like. And
Yeah.
we don't get to hear a lot about it. And I think I love that you point out that sort of what I would call a lost art in our world, which is how to disagree but still stay connected to each other's humanity, to still respect each other, to still love each other. Like that's so absent in like so many arenas of our lives right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of that, is that, we talked about the individualism before, but the other thing is that you're seeing is that even in families, there's that kind of sense of nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
And then now, even worse now is like even just like the single parent family, right? Like it's the notion of family is becoming really, really
Smaller and
small,
smaller.
right? And those interactions that you and I are talking about don't exist for many of them,
Mm.
right? Being in a multi-generational home, I got to see so many dynamics at play,
Mm-hmm.
right? Much of it I didn't understand as a child, but more of it I'm understanding as an adult, the benefit of having a multi-generational home. And not just a multi-generational home, but also an extended community of people that share the same values, right? Like one of the things I took away from growing up in a Guyanese family was that we had my cousins, my extended family. We were constantly in touch with them. Um, we were constantly in touch with, an extended Guyanese community here too. Again, shared values, shared culture, all those things, which, created a sense of home and belonging for us
Mm.
in a kind of you know, strange place. Let me just put it that way. That was like kind of not quite in alignment to, or not necessarily in opposition to who we were, but it was just different. Um, so all those things that I think contributed to where I'm at now. But what I am seeing now, and I'm worried about it, I'm concerned about it. This, we've got very small families with very small networks, and our ability to socialize and to connect is being greatly affected by that.
Mm-hmm.
The sense of isolation and depression and anxiety and all those things are starting to manifest in different ways. And yeah, it concerns me. Even for my kids, it concerns me. Like, I don't know what world they're walking into. So,
Yeah, my partner and I have talked to several times about how frightening it feels right now to think about bringing kids into this world and thinking about what's left for them, what are they exposed to all the time. Like the idea of that really freaks me out as a total barrier to like in our current landscape.
100% agreed. Yeah, I hesitate to turn the news on in the morning. I don't want another reason to hide out, me? So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah.
it does
Yeah,
concern me.
in my household, I have to put headphones on if I'm going to watch the news because it doesn't work for my partner. He gets lit up so fast about the lack of fairness and about the lack of, he just can't, it just is like, it's just not good for him or for us to have that on in there. So I definitely have to have
Yeah,
headphones on.
yeah, yeah. Which like it creates a sense of purpose for me, and I would imagine for you as well, doing the work that we were doing, right? Like you need a sense of commitment and resilience and focus and determination to do the work that we're doing,
100%.
because sometimes it feels like, swimming upstream,
Yeah,
right? It's some days I wake up, I feel like kind of hopeless. Like, what's the point of all this if the world is going, down in flames, right? But at the same time, if we have any hope of turning things around, it's in the work that we're doing.
for sure.
that would have any chance of turning things around, right? So that's why when I look at my work, it's not a matter of me working with the men directly in front of me, though it is. It's hope that, that the men that I'm working with, they could see another possibility for themselves and for the generation following them, that it has some chance of sticking, right? That the next generation doesn't have to deal with for part of my word, the shit that's happening right now, right? But that we can, at least improve things generation at a time, and is not just stuck with the men in my immediate circle.
I appreciate you sharing both the clarity of your mission, like what you're seeking to do with your work, but also those moments of hopelessness. Because I think that at least this is a trap I fall into as a coach, as a social worker. I have fallen into the trap that I always have to remain positive and I always have to have my like fearful beliefs in check, and that I have to like really just identify within my like professional identity rather than letting myself be a man who has fears, who worries about the world. And I can try to can lean into almost like a perfectionist quality around not showing that vulnerable side of myself. So I appreciate you being willing to just bring forward both your clarity of mission and sometimes the hopelessness, because that's way more real than what I'm trying to present at times.
Yeah. And look I see a lot of men, men and leaders out there doing men's work, and you see them on social media and whatnot, and they present this kind of polished, I got it all figured out kind of attitude. I got the framework, man. I've got the 101s. I've got the tips and the hacks and the tricks and all that other stuff. But they're dealing with so much stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah.
100%. They haven't escaped anything. Right? They're dealing with drugs. They're dealing with alcoholism. They're dealing with broken marriages and failed relationships and children and school and all these other things. They're dealing with the real stuff too.
Yeah.
I see it even in the community of men, leaders that I'm working with here, is that we're so on, right? We're so on facilitating and coaching and leading and that when do you take the cape off? When do you take the cape off, kick the boots off, and sit down and just okay, deal with your own stuff, right? You have to deal with your own stuff.
I think that's what I was alluding to in the introduction, that I had to take a little bit of a break from like creation and putting work out there, because my life got challenging. My partner had some health issues towards the end of last year that were really scary for us. And I had to navigate that and deal with that. I couldn't just be continuing to show up for other people when my life is rocking quite a bit.
Right.
And so giving myself that space to take the cape off and to interestingly, that's why I kind of called out people might not notice, because I was at least ahead enough in my work where I could give myself that space where it doesn't actually look like it. But at least internally, I was taking the cape off for a little while and really trying to really focus in on what feels hard and scary to me.
Yeah. And, this again goes back to, our culture. It's so performative driven. We're taught and encouraged and reinforced that we must achieve X. This whole culture of having to do it better, faster than before. Right. And it's also part of the thing I think is making our culture sick.
Yeah.
Right. Of always having to be on this 24/7, 365 mindset. Right. Come on, guys. Right. I think we're at a poverty when it comes to connecting with our spirit. I think we're at a poverty when it comes to connecting with the value of love. And what does that mean beyond just thinking about intimacy and sex? I think we're at a poverty when it comes to belonging, right? To self, to others, to our world. And because we're so driven to perform.
Dude, right? I love that you use the language of poverty when it comes to that, because so much of what we're talking about that drives us to be on all the time is sort of that capitalism, making enough money, providing for our families. It's that driving force and that central power force that's going on in I I'll speak for the US culture. In US culture, I would imagine it's pretty similar for you as well.
Yeah.
And to utilize that poverty language, which is what most people are fearfully running from in terms of their financial poverty, but to really take stock and recognize that we have a poverty in so many other aspects of our life. And that might be really where the source of the challenge is and what we're running from.
Absolutely. And, I'll speak from my perspective working with men of color. That poverty, that sense of poverty never goes away.
Yeah.
Right. Many men particularly who've lived in the U.S. for generations, are always reminded of their scarcity.
Yeah.
Right. Or the lack of resources or lack of opportunities. Even if regardless of how successful you are. I work with, Black men and women leaders who have high ranking positions in organizations. They always are living in that kind of fear that it's going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they're going to go back to a time where they will have no more opportunities, no more resources, no more whatever. So that scarcity mindset is entrenched in many of them. Right. And that can create an enormous amount of stress and anxiety.
Oh, totally. And it reminds me of what the sort of mixed messages that you were wrestling with as a child and growing up around, like, you have to work harder, can't take things for granted. Like, you're constantly hustling against something that isn't even like something you can control.
I can't control it. Who made up these rules? Right. And we put so much importance on financial wealth that we lose out on the other kinds of wealth, that being in a community and being in family. And that's why I'm speaking back to the poverty of things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we do need money to survive in this world. We do need money to keep the lights on and the heater on and all those things. Absolutely. But one of the things that I coach many of my clients is finding some sense of where else can we put the light on? Right. Yes, you got your career figured out. All right, cool. But what about your relationships at home? What about your relationships with yourself, like with your body, with your mind? What about your relationship with God, the spirit, the conscious, however you want to call it, the divine and whatnot? Like, these are all aspects of who we are. And if we don't pay attention to them, then they have a tendency to wither and die. And you can't just bring that back without putting the work in.
Mm-hmm. And it does take work, and it does take sometimes a coach reminding us of those aspects of our lives, or it does because our cultures don't really tell us to focus on those aspects of our lives. They're not what creates productivity. They're not what make us money. And so there's so much momentum around that one aspect, the career aspect of our identities. And there's not that constant reminder very often for most men about the other aspects of their lives.
Well, you just look at our school systems.
Uh-huh.
That's all they teach you. That's all they prepare you for, is having a career. Right? That's all they prepare you for, is that. Right? So, and, going back to what we spoke about with the nuclear families, even the breakdown of nuclear families, there's not a lot of mentoring around the other aspects of your life, because you probably have a single parent who's working 24/7, multiple jobs just to put food on your table. Right. So those are realities many men face. Right. Is this hyper sense of responsibility to provide, to make money. Right. But that's only one dimension of who we are as men.
I get so frustrated with the systems that force people into those situations, that force people to only model to their children how hard they have to work. They don't get to be with them. They don't get to spend quality time with them, or mentor them, or show or be present in their lives, because they're so busy working, trying to survive. And that's an absolutely beautiful skill set to model to somebody. But to only model survival skills and to always be in that survival part of our nervous system that others around us can feel like that. It's
Yeah.
just like teaching stress.
Yeah, and
Constantly.
100%. And this would be more of a curiosity or wondering out loud
Mm,
is what I'm also noticing, and I'm not sure if it's for fact, is the pendulum is swinging the other way,
mm,
where young people seeing their parents stressed out of having to work so hard, couldn't care about committing to a job, couldn't care about committing to a career path. They're more aloof, they're less committed, they're less determined, they're less whatever, and are, living in these kind of fantasy worlds where they can play anywhere and, there's no sense of responsibility to the thing. That's what I'm noticing,
hmm
right? Is that kind of pendulum is swinging the other way where there's a sense of entitlement, over focus, highly focused on pleasure, not feeling responsible to anyone, right, but themselves. I'm not sure in your spaces, but I'm just noticing that as a growing trend of concern that there's where we're going as a culture.
Isn't that kind of how it goes though? Like that any change often revolves swinging the pendulum way too far the other way, and then finally we start
Exactly.
to let it find a center point that
Yeah.
it happens in politics, it happens in uh like any change that like the clients that I work with, as soon as they start to make a change, they go really rigidly in the other direction. And it's not sustainable to be in that other side of things. They're going to fail, they're going to crash and burn. And yet, that knowing what's on the other side of that pendulum is what's necessary in order to find the center point.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's
I agree
uncomfortable
with
to
you.
watch, though.
It is.
And there a lot of judgment can come up.
It's like, yeah, that's going to come up in a session in about 10 years. This is
Uh-huh.
yeah. But
Yeah, that's, I mean, I guess
I
that's
know.
what how patterns change. We watch it happen all the time, is that the pendulum swings the other side, and then it swings, and then it swings, and it swings, and it starts to, ideally, hopefully, those swings become less extreme and less like almost violent, extremely to the other
Yeah,
side.
you hope, right?
You hope.
I think this is where, when you have, I have my mentors, I have my elders that I rely on too.
Mm,
And I reach out to them for their advice and their wisdom, and they've seen enough of these pendulum swings to know, yeah, this is just it's a different flavor,
hmm
but they can see the swing, right? And I think that's part of the work of being more conscious or more aware is when, okay, where are we in that cycle? Not to fix it, but to understand, okay, that's part
Uh-huh.
of what's going on here,
I
you
think
know?
that's what I think I'm focusing on as I watch this and I get into my own worries or my own judgments of the swing. Is I'm like focusing on learning how to temper myself, like to recognize, like, okay, I have seen that this is part of the change process in individuals, but in collectives as well. And so I don't have to panic around this. This is normal. This is natural. My judgments and worries are also valid, but I don't necessarily, I want to temper myself to them so that I don't go to the extreme level of panic and fear. I want to
Yeah.
be in that space of like, that makes sense. And there are other ways to do this. We don't have to swing it that far. We don't have to, like, giving other options rather than getting myself into a spin where I'm dysregulated because of it.
Yeah, I think that's been a large part of my personal work,
Mm,
and to do the work that I'm doing, I need to exactly what you're saying is noticing it, observing it, um, not forcefully pushing it any other way and getting all my energy riled up in it, but just being conscious. Yeah, that's where we are,
mhm.
and it makes sense.
Radical acceptance is so hard.
Yeah,
And I guess
yeah,
maybe I'm contradicting myself right now, but like I maybe that's not the goal all the time, is to remain neutral or to remain fully acceptance. Like I think there are reasons to get really upset in the world and to demand and to take up space with energy and to really stake an opinion and a claim in something to help shift something that's
Yeah.
not safe, that's not going to lead to the well-being of others, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I don't mean to imply that we need to be aloof about these things or kind of neutral around when things
Oh,
shouldn't be neutral, don't deserve
no.
neutral. Yeah.
No, look, I want when I want to just separate the idea of acceptance and being neutral. I
Uh,
don't see them as the same thing.
uh-huh.
Because accepting a situation or circumstance as it is could drive action,
Mm-hmm.
right? Could drive a vision, could drive a sense of purpose and meaning. It doesn't mean that I don't care, right? Being neutral or apathetic to me, I interpret that as different as accepting.
Uh-huh.
Being accepting is okay, this is the condition and situation I'm in. How do I show up in this now?
Yeah. Who do I want to be in this now?
Who do
Yeah.
I want exactly? Who do I want
Yeah.
to be in this? If this is the situation or the challenge or whatever it is I'm finding myself, okay, I accept it for what it is. How do I want to show up now?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the way I interpret someone saying neutral or apathetic, it's like, okay, this is it, but I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
It's not my problem.
So what I'm hearing is like it's like acceptance doesn't mean letting go of your sense of power or your efficacy or your willingness to like show up as a man in that situation and claim who you
Yeah.
want to be and what your values are in that
Right.
situation.
Yes,
It's just not
exactly.
arguing that the situation like needs like it's recognizing the situation is what it is rather than arguing against reality and
Yeah.
then deciding who you want to be in reality rather than in this
Yeah.
imaginary space you've created of what it
Yeah.
should be.
Right. So the way I coach around this is, is noticing, okay, what's here right now?
Mm.
What is this? What's the opportunity for me to be a leader here? Versus shoving an opinion or a perspective down it and saying it has to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
Is more about, okay, what can I create from this now? And that's how I elaborate the sense of responsibility. Here's the circumstance, the situation. How am I going to respond to it? That's in alignment with my core values, with an alignment with my sense of being and purpose. That's in alignment with my skill or aptitude, whatever it is, versus, oh, it must be only this way and shove it down. It's like, okay, you know, but yeah, it's about being conscious of how I am in that situation
Mm-hmm.
versus needing to be something else.
Yeah, that consciousness. It can be so hard to stay conscious when we are afraid, when we are in judgment of of the situation we're observing, when we are in scarcity, when like all of those things, they pull us out of consciousness. They make us
Oh yeah.
reactive, they make us lean into old coping strategies, they make us want to numb.
Yeah. The whole fight, flight, freeze thing, right? Right. If we're not conscious, those things kick in, right?
Hmm.
Um, absolutely. And yeah, being working on our awareness, yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure.
But also finding ways to numb out is a lot of work. Right? So
Uh-huh.
you pick your battle. Which one do you want? Right? So
Totally. I want to draw you out now a little bit more specifically on your men's work community, the Four Men of Color, and hear more about what that group is about for you, why you created it, what are some of the values of it, and what
yeah.
men could expect if they were coming to one of your groups.
Right. Well, I'll share you the sort of the inspiration for because, like I alluded to you before, I've been doing men's work for some time now.
Mm-hmm.
20, maybe 20, close to 20 years now. And many of the groups that I found myself in, for whatever rhyme or reason, were predominantly white-bodied men in those circles, right? And nothing wrong with that. It was, I gained a lot of insight. I gained a lot of wisdom. I gained a lot of perspective of who I was. And it was a lot of sharing, a lot of contribution, a lot of vulnerability in those spaces. And they were quite mostly safe. However, there's certain topics I knew I couldn't bring to light in those spaces, particularly ones that were pertaining to my culture, my racial identity, my ethnicity, all those things. I couldn't bring it to them. right? So there was facets of who I am that was left kind of in the shadow, right? So when I envisioned doing and I was hungry to create be able to belong to a new men's group, um, but I was also appealing to this other need.
Hmm. Before you share about that part of it, I want to know, like, what comes up as in your experience when you do bring those parts of you into that? Like, what convinces you that that can't be brought into that space?
There's tends to be denial,
Uh,
resistance, bypassing, minimalization of those experiences.
oh, just those?
Yeah, just those.
Just those.
So if I was to bring up, if I was to bring up this notion, like like when we talked earlier about having to work harder than
Yeah.
white body counterparts, and the reasons why I may not get a promotion, but my other partner might get a promotion. They would say, okay, well, maybe you didn't do this right, or maybe you did this wrong, or like they'll get to figuring it out on their terms.
Oh.
Okay. But not recognizing the fact that there is racial bias inside of an organization.
Hmm.
They would not see that as a possibility.
Figuring it out on their terms. That's such a insightful way of sharing that. Like, it's not that they're not willing to figure it out. It's just that they have no ability yet to figure it out on anything other than their terms.
Exactly.
Uh,
Right. So in this space that I'm creating, it's not that we sit down and we talk about racism all day long. No. But when we unpack our lived experiences, that other dimension is allowed to belong in that conversation. It's not the wild card that comes out each and every time we talk, because we struggle with family, we struggle with intimacy, we struggle with work, we struggle with our health, and like just like every other man does. But then there's other experiences that men of color have, um, that we need to put a light on that too, because it might be a factor in how we experience these things.
mhm.
It might be a factor in how we show up with a woman, right? In an intimate relationship, whether as a black woman or a white woman. Those things are there. But not but allowing a man to speak it out gives him access to other resources within himself.
Mm.
And the funny thing is that when we allow that our identity to be spoken into the space, less important it is.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And then the energy is going into, okay, what can we create from this now? Now that we've put all on the table, now what we can create from here,
Yeah, I
right?
think when you and I originally talked, you used some language around like identity as like the doorway, and then and
Yes,
then there's like the other work that's beyond that doorway.
yes, exactly. So when I look at that, is for men to feel, first of all, it's very hard for men of color to want to actually be in a group that talks about these things.
Hmm.
We know statistically black men do not do therapy. They don't do counseling. They don't do social work. They don't do anything. So you can't imagine them wanting to jump into a circle with other men just because, right? So enrolling men to belong to a community like this, it takes some energy. The fact that we put it out there that this group is for men of color, the hope is, and the response has been, oh, that gives me a license to be myself
Hmm.
in a circle of other men who've probably have experienced things about their racial identity like I have.
Hmm.
But once you're in the door, yeah, we're not talking about racism.
Hmm.
We're not talking about white supremacy. We're not talking about, all those things that we, out there when we talk about all these, like Black Lives Matter movements and stuff like this. We're just being real men.
Mm.
We're talking about love. We're talking about sports. We're talking about food. We're talking about work. We're talking about, our children and everything like this. We're talking about childhood trauma and all these. But to know that there's the key that we can bring in other parts of that conversation to life too. Just creates for us a fuller conversation.
Yeah, it's like not needing to keep parts of you in shadow or to feel like certain parts are off the table or unsafe to talk about. I I have, it's not the same, but I have my own experiences as a queer man with those kinds of things. Like there's parts of
One,
my life that I do have to keep in shadow. It feels like when I'm talking with other men, especially heterosexual men, is like I do have to
100%.
hold back in what on my life.
Yeah, and I took and absolutely
Yeah.
right. But what a disservice is that to you or I that you have to protect a part of you,
Yeah.
keep it in shadow, right? While wanting to be fully expressed as a human being,
Hmm.
right? So my attempt here is to create that space where we don't have those things in the back. We can bring them out and put them on the table. And knowing that they're on the table, we can talk about all of those things and more.
Hmm.
Nothing is left untouched.
Mm. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can help me kind of sort this out since we have found this place of commonality where parts of our identity need spaces to feel free and safe and to be seen. And then that's the doorway into the deeper work. What do you think about, like, sometimes I think about creating a men's group for queer men. That's sort of like a space where queer men can gather, that is a safe space where nothing is left off the table, where we can bring all of those pieces that we don't have to do that kind of sorting. Um, and then there's another part of me that thinks like, but down the road, I think part of the healing happens when we integrate, when it's no longer a space that's just for queer men, that some of our deep wounding comes from our relationships with heterosexual men, and the healing can come also in relationship with heterosexual men or cisgender men.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think about that concept of like having a space and a community that of like people that are like you, but then the other part of it, which is to find ways of belonging beyond just in that small circle.
Yeah. First of all, I'm all totally on board with everything you're talking about.
Uh-huh.
Because again, we can't live in isolation of the bigger picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
You and I walk in this bigger world where there are heterosexual men, there are white men, there are Asian men,
Yeah.
there are black men. Like we can't ignore that. That's where we
Yeah.
live,
Yeah.
right? And if I believe in this concept that we need to be belonging in a sense of community, it has to be inclusive of everyone.
Right.
Now, the thing is that where we stand right now, I don't think the bridges are established to create those networks
Uh-huh.
in a holistic kind of conscious way.
Mm-hmm.
But I am doing my work as a leader to have those conversations with like yourself
Mm-hmm.
and other men who are doing men's work who don't look like me. Maybe they're older or younger. Maybe they are queer, gay, whatever it is. I'm having those conversations, right? To know, okay, what else is going on the other side and bringing that back home, right? Now, is my community still quite young and
Mm-hmm.
still quite small. Um, but yeah, you have to have that bigger picture in mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because look at for many of the men that I've worked with currently in the past, they work in environments where there's a lot of fear
Mm-hmm.
because those relationships have not been established between a black man and a white man, right? Or a black queer man and a white heterosexual man. Like those relationships are not, they don't, those networks don't exist in the way that I would want for them, right? But that's what I think is part of the work, right?
So I think what I'm hearing from that I'm getting clarity from what you're sharing is like that question comes from being out in the future, and yet there are steps to build bridges and to do healing work that are just as important right up in front of us, rather than being in the future and just like I have an image of it. I'm trying to put words to it. It's sort of like I'm ahead of myself. Like do the work that's right in front of you rather than worrying about the steps
Yeah.
15, 16, and 17. Just do 1, 2, and 3 for now.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's like the idea, you know, you're going to plant the seed now that hopefully in 20 or 30 years you have a nice big
Yeah.
seed that you could sit under, right? And not
Uh-huh.
wait till 20 or 30 years to hope that their tree is going to show up,
Uh-huh.
right? Like the idea for me is planting seeds,
Yeah.
right? I'm planting seeds in the work and then the men that I'm working with in hope that it's going to manifest into something of use in the future
Mm.
and not waiting for the future as a reason to do it then.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So,
Mm.
and that's going to require for me is to, yeah, it's to look further down the road, but also do something about it now,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
right?
you for that. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. There's two more questions that I have for you. As when we first connected, you had shared with me something that you're currently working on as an individual, and that is something along the lines of like your capacity for love. It's your like current fundamental learning that you're playing with. Is there anything that you would be up for sharing about like the you're a leader that's leading these spaces, but the kind of continued work that you're doing as a man as you take the cape off?
I think I think love is the fundamental quality, right, of being a human being.
Mm,
I think when you look at the crisis around the world right now, um, those are spaces that are lacking in love. They're hate filled, they're vengeful, they're oppositional, they're confrontational, whether it's people to people or even people to land, right? And to me, there's a poverty of love in that.
mm,
And I had to also recognize that within myself, right? Where was I being selfish? Where was I being apathetic or lacking care or concern? Where was I being superficial and transactional? One of the things that I had to learn, one of the things I did not expect to learn in becoming a coach and a facilitator and a guide is having the capacity to love,
mm.
recognizing that that's a natural thing in our system is the capacity to love. And unless we're conscious of it and exercise it, it'll atrophy. And I think that the atrophies, you were seeing it as depression, we're seeing it as anxiety, we're seeing it in isolation, we're seeing it in the dependency of external factors to numb out,
Mm-hmm.
right? To me, there's that poverty of love. And when the thing that I see and I witness about in our literature, especially literature for men, is that love is connected with sex.
Mm,
That's not what I'm talking about,
yeah.
right? To love deeply and unconditionally is what I'm talking about. You will defend something that you deeply love. You will work hard for something that you would deeply love, right? You will commit to something you deeply love. And I think one of the things is that we haven't learned to love who we are.
Hmm.
And that's manifesting in how we relate to other people.
Hmm.
The fact that we don't think ourselves as being worthy, that we have to work hard and improve ourselves. We're searching for affirmations and validations. And that's not signs of love, right? We haven't been taught to love who we are because somewhere in our early childhood, we were conditioned to the idea that we had to perform.
Yeah.
We were
Exactly.
not accepted. And I could imagine you coming and sharing that you're as a queer man, how safe did you feel growing up with all those questions in your head,
Not at all.
right? How were you not afraid of not feeling accepted or feeling worthy for who you really are,
Yeah.
right? Well, I think right now that's a big problem for all young people is like, do my parents accept me for who I am?
Mm-hmm.
Are they spending the time to nurture me the way that those types of things, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I had to learn, and I am learning, and it's not like I'm a master at it or a guru at this, it's understanding that that core quality, that essence of who we are as a human being is in the word love.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. You're welcome.
It's really powerful. And I don't think I could find one word in that that I disagree with. And I appreciate you making it real and making it about not just what you want for others, but also what you're learning for yourself. Because I think that's important to be able to see a man who's learning that in himself, that's learning to confront those pieces in himself that didn't learn how to love himself and others, and
Yeah.
is working on expanding that capacity, is learning to go, okay, this is what I was dealt, this is what I know, and yet here's who I want to be as a
Yeah.
result of accepting that.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of my work and part of what I'm bringing into my other work.
That's
You know?
beautiful. If you wanted to leave men who are listening to this, or anybody, I have a pretty mixed audience, but if you were leaving people with a piece of advice and offering an invitation, something like that, what might you want to leave people with?
Hmm. Look, the one thing I would leave people with is this idea that, look, we're here for a very finite time, and we can use it however we want. And that's your choice. But there's something incredibly rich in learning who you are. And I invite every man to have the courage to look at themselves and to, accept who they, going back to that sense of acceptance. Who are you?
Hmm.
Right? To really get connected with self.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope is that by connecting with self, you learn to connect with others at another level. So, you got time, right? It's a finite resource. You don't get it back. You can't make more of it. So, man, figure who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Learn who you are. Have the courage to do that. And don't do it by yourself. Do not do that. This is not a lonely adventure. This is not a solo trip.
It's not going to go
right?
well doing it alone.
Yeah. Find people like yourself. Find people that you can connect with. Find people that can hold you, support you, and care for you, and explore. Learn about what makes you you, right? Because there's probably a lot of gold in there that you haven't even touched yet,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I invite all men to do that.
Thank you for that. I think that's the right direction, learning to connect with self, and then hopefully that helps you learn to connect with others. I think until
Absolutely.
we learn how to connect with ourselves, we don't really know how to be in relationship to others, to the land, to our resources, to anything.
Everything.
Yeah, it starts here. It starts
It does start
inward,
to.
for sure.
Yeah.
If people wanted or were like kind of listening to you and were interested in your group, who can attend your groups and how might they find out how to sign up for them?
Yeah. So my groups, like you said in our introduction, is targeted towards men of color, and that is inclusive of men who identify as Black, Brown, Asian, African, mixed race, etc. You can find us at our website is formenofcolor.com. And yeah, you could find me on Instagram, you could find me on LinkedIn, you could find me everywhere. So yeah, by all means, just reach out, ask a question, and I'll enroll you.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'll make sure all that information's in the show notes so people can really find you and get connected to your work. Thank you so much, Charles, for joining me for this beautiful conversation. I've really enjoyed connecting with you and being able to learn from your lived experience, but also in moments learn how to touch into my lived experience by connecting with you.
Yeah, man. I
Appreciate
enjoyed it.
that.
Thank you very much, Travis, for including me in your adventure here.
We love having you in the New Masculine. If you want to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Travers03. If you want to participate in the ongoing conversations of this podcast, please find me on there. That's where the live conversations are going on. And if you want to contribute to the mission of this podcast, please go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Thanks again so much, Charles, for joining me. And until our next episode.